In Pursuit of Truth, this is your host, Sir Patrick Mac. Boys and girls, grab your coffee. Today we're in hot pursuit.
Deja vu, I just been in this place before. Higher on the street, and I know it's my time to go.
The tension mounts. I'm ready. You ready? Let's do it. All right, so sadly, yours truly had to deal with a rolling blackout today, which cost me some hours of time. But I wanted to make sure that I got this story out because I do think it's important. We had a couple of visits to Afghanistan. We're going to talk about them both. Let's talk about this first one here off of taskandpurpose.com. Secretary of Defense Esper. U.S. forces in Afghanistan could drop to 8,600 without things falling apart. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper arrived in Afghanistan on Sunday in a bid to bring talks with the Taliban back on track after President Donald Trump abruptly broke off negotiations last month, seeking to end the United States' longest war. Esper's trip to Kabul comes amid questions about the United States' commitments to allies after a sudden withdrawal of U.S. troops from northeastern Syria and Trump's long time desire to get out of foreign engagements. The aim is to still get a peace agreement at some point, a political agreement that is the best way forward, Esper told reporters traveling with him to Afghanistan. He is due to meet President Ashraf Ghani and U.S. troops while in Afghanistan. I hope we can move forward and come up with a political agreement that meets our ends and meets the goals we want to achieve, Esper said, adding that talks were in the State Department's domain. He added that the United States could go down to about 8,600 troops from the current 14,000 without affecting counterterrorism operations if needed. Okay, so that's a pretty significant decrease right there. Trump halted talks with the Taliban aimed at striking a deal for U.S. and other foreign troops to withdraw in exchange for Taliban security guarantees after it carried out a bomb attack in Kabul last month that killed 12 people, including a U.S. soldier. Okay, so Secretary of Defense, and remember, this guy is a Trump appointee. I want to point out that he was a former Raytheon guy, and he was also a big-time lobbyist. But like I said, it is important to know that this was a Trump appointee. This seems to be the official visit. And I find it very interesting that we've been talking about Syria, Turkey, and now all of a sudden we're talking again about Afghanistan. Well, it turns out our boy Esper is not the only person in Afghanistan. Looks like Nancy Pants Pelosi decided to toss a visit out there too. U.S. Defense Secretary House Speaker makes separate surprise visits to Afghanistan. This is from the Wall Street Journal. In a separate visit to the Afghan capital following previously unannounced talks with King Abdullah in Jordan, which was also really suspect, House Speaker Nancy Pants Pelosi continued seeking to offer a counterpoint to what the Democrats and some Republicans in the U.S. Congress view as the Trump administration's chaotic and damaging conduct of foreign policy. Mrs. Pelosi, in comments to Afghan reporters at the U.S. Embassy, said America must have a strategic vision for Afghanistan, a commitment that, unlike other countries where the U.S. had a presence, reflected the loss of American lives since the American-led invasion that ousted the Taliban in 2001. Okay. Translation. Looks like Nancy Pants is breaking the Logan Act. Both Mrs. Pelosi and Mr. Esper were set to meet with President Ashraf Ghani and U.S. military officials, but it couldn't immediately be determined whether they would meet each other during their brief visits to Kabul. Both, however, arrived here amid doubts about the Trump administration's commitments to allies after the sudden withdrawal of U.S. troops from northeastern Syria. The visits follow Mr. Trump's declaration early in September that year-long U.S. talks with the Taliban on a negotiated settlement of the 18-year war were dead. U.S. and Afghan officials have long feared that Mr. Trump's aversion to foreign entanglements would lead him to order an immediate withdrawal of all 14,500 American military personnel from the country, especially as next year's U.S. presidential election draws near. In his comments to reporters, Mr. Esper appeared to suggest that a drawdown in the context of a negotiated settlement was preferable to a unilateral troop withdrawal, which former National Security Advisor John Bolton had urged. Okay, so this is strange, because it sounds like Democrats don't want any troops to leave, and of course this Mr. Esper is sort of proposing that this get knocked down to about 8,600 people. I'm quite surprised that John Bolton would have urged any troops leaving. So that seems very out of character for John Bolton. A peace agreement with the Taliban was still the best way forward, and the administration's aim was to achieve such a deal at some point, he said. Since Mr. Trump abruptly ended U.S. Taliban talks in September, the chief American negotiator, Zalmay Khalilzad, has remained on the job, urging the Taliban to take steps to reduce violence and seeking to discourage regional powers from acting as spoilers, while the fate and directions of the negotiations remain uncertain. Okay, so lots of crazy stuff going on. I want to just point out today a few things that are going on recently and how they may interconnect, and I'll leave you with that. But as we know, Pelosi was already in Jordan, and of course that was already suspicious. Now, she was meeting with top Jordanian officials, so we don't really know exactly who. We just know they were top Jordanian officials, and according to The Hill, what they were talking about, of course, was stability in the region, but particularly I wanted to point out they were talking about increased flow of immigrants. And so I think that's really what this comes down to. But it also comes down to money, and really both kind of go hand in hand, right? So I want to mention that this Ashraf Ghani, who is president of Afghanistan, I would imagine that we have basically a couple different factions here, and we're playing a little bit of a game of he said, she said. So first of all, we have Esper, who is already proposing some sort of, looks to be in the middle of compromise of just scaling back troops as opposed to just yanking them all out, which of course would create a PR nightmare, even if it were the right thing to do. I'm not so sure if it is the right thing to do or not. I'm not an expert, but either way, I think we all know if you just yanked them all out, it would be a PR nightmare, and I think it would be pretty impossible to defend, even if it were correct. So here we have this kind of deal going on, but then we've got, like I said, a he said, she said thing going on where Nancy Pelosi's following up. We saw a very similar thing one time with Obama and President Trump. He was sort of following up too, right? That's what this looks like to me, but I have a feeling that we're going after money. After all, Ashraf Ghani, before that he was president, he was a finance minister, and he was actually brought in as president to kind of help recover Afghanistan after the fall of the Taliban government. That was the whole point. And I don't really know that they've had much economic recovery, if at all, there. But it would seem to me that this is a hit up for money, at least in one aspect. So like I said, president, now finance minister previously, but he's also done a ton of work with the World Bank and also with the UN in regards to this. Forgive me, I won't quite get the name right, but it's like a legal empowerment fund. It reminds me a little bit of our, we call it Kids in Need of Defense here in the United States. It's this organization that kind of helps get people legal representation for poor people, illegal immigrants, and things like that. In the United States, KIND is represented, that's Bill Gates and Angelina Jolie, but it's a kind of a similar thing. I'm not conflating the two here. I just want you to know that he obviously is pro-immigrant. And of course, like I just said, they were talking about the flow of immigrants in Jordan. So, a lot of money. Looks like they're wanting to make sure that these borders stay open. And it wouldn't surprise me if they're checking on those poppy fields out there in Afghanistan. Now, a couple more quick things about Ashraf Ghani. He attended Columbia. He also taught at Berkeley. And he also attended Stanford Business School. This is kind of weird. It's a Harvard program sponsored by the World Bank, but it's at Stanford Graduate Business School. So this guy's got all the makings of a clown knucklehead. But again, finance minister and now president, of course, he's hooking up with Pelosi. It looks like he's hooking up with both Pelosi and Esper this week. But one more thing I want to point out about Ghani, just earlier this year, it was his own general, his security advisor, Habibullah Ahmadzai, accused him of running kind of this, how should I say, kind of a sex ring, I guess. But it was within his own, parliament. Basically, anybody who was sleeping with whomever were getting elected positions. And so this was a pretty big mess by his own security advisor. And like I said, this was just months ago. So just to give you an idea of who Pelosi and Esper are meeting with. Okay, so we know that Pelosi and Esper are out there in Afghanistan. We know that Pelosi was just recently in Jordan. And we know that this came off the heels of her little tiff with President Trump that was, of course, rung through the media, right? Now, let's step away from that for just a second, and I want to talk about Mexico, particularly northern Mexico, where we have all this fighting around Culiacan. And this is over El Chapo's son. His name is Ovidio. And, of course, he is another Sinaloa cartel heavy player. El Chapo himself was arrested a couple times. He escaped through a tunnel in 2015, later got extradited again in 2017. If you guys remember, he was, I believe, at MCC where Jeffrey Epstein, that whole episode went down. He was later transferred out. I don't know if they were there at the same time or not, but this was over a routine stop where they actually caught Ovidio, El Chapo's son. And then, of course, this sparked heavy fire. And if you're not familiar with the Sinaloa cartel down there, they're massive and they're just as well armed as their military. This is an incredibly complex story, too. I don't completely understand it. But even amongst the Sinaloa cartel, there is a lot of fighting for power there, too, especially in the absence of El Chapo. But this involved multiple families. There's a ton of different gangster families down there fighting for control. But particularly, this seems to be between security forces and the Sinaloa cartel. And of course, this is a very dangerous. People are already starting to die. So why are we talking about this stuff right here? Well, because El Chapo was likely a heavy funder of some Democrats, in particular, people like Nancy Pelosi. Oddly enough, we were just talking about Nancy Pelosi, right? Now, it was reported that he was going to testify that he had given millions to Democrats, including Pelosi. But then that ended up being kind of disputed, saying that wasn't true or whatnot. But it's been long suspected, and it shouldn't surprise us, right? Let's remember that Nancy Pelosi is actually Nancy D'Alessandro, and that is also a longtime gangster family. You can think about her brother, who recently just passed away. Now consider, he was 90 years old, but this just happened also. So we have the death of Nancy Pelosi's brother from the long-running D'Alessandro gangster family. Of course, both her brother and her father were mayor of Baltimore. How about that? And we lost another Baltimore giant the other day, right? And that giant was Elijah Cummings. How about that? So we have all these things relating right back to Nancy Pants Pelosi. Now, for a little bit more context, I want to refer you back to this picture right here that I think many of you might be thinking of sending me right now. Let's go ahead and talk about it. So if you're not looking at the screen, I'd love you to check this out so that you can get a little bit more context here with this picture. This is a 2016 picture, and as you can see right there in the center, there is President of Mexico, Enrique Peña Nieto. And then, of course, we've got Nancy Pants Pelosi, and looks to be behind her to be Robert Francis O'Rourke, and we're going to talk about him a little bit too. But over on the right here, you see is labeled as El Chapo. Now, I don't believe that to be true. I do not believe this is El Chapo. If this is indeed taken at around the time of 2016, he would have been incarcerated, and I believe this to be actually representative out of Texas, Henry Cuellar. Now, I do believe that El Chapo was funding people like Pelosi, and I also believe that he was funding people like Robert Francis O'Rourke. We're going to talk briefly about him in just just a second. But as that other article I just kind of showed you there, it looked like some money was going to Hillary Clinton, Adam Schiff. This should all start kind of coming into line. Now, what does this have to do with Afghanistan, Syria, and all that? Well, I'll let you know, but although I don't believe this to be El Chapo, I do think the connection to Mr. Cuellar is even more interesting. And let me show you why. Well, our Mr. Cuellar is a bit of an enigma. He seems to say one thing and maybe profit from another. This is an article from Breitbart, June of 2018. Democratic lawmaker, Obama admin kept child migrant crisis very quiet. Representative Henry Cuellar claimed in an interview Saturday that the Obama administration tried to cover up the number of unaccompanied minors crossing the United States southern border. It was kept very quiet under the Obama administration. There were large numbers of people coming in. The Obama administration was trying to keep this quiet, the Texas Democrat told CNN's Frederica Whitfield on Saturday. According to data from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, nearly 70,000 unaccompanied minors crossed the southern border in fiscal year 2014, the period between October 1st, 2013 to September 30th, 2014. Cuellar's comments come after the Department of Homeland Security revealed Friday that nearly 2,000 children had been separated from their guardians at the U.S. border in the past 6 weeks. The agency revealed the number of children being separated as the Trump administration began its zero-tolerance policy in prosecuting illegal aliens. Okay, so let's get away from Mr. Cuellar for just a second and let's rememberize a few things. I want to take you back to the year 2017. And no, it was November. Wall Street Journal. And they came out saying that they had anonymous sources that said that General Flynn and son Michael Flynn they were involved in a kind of conspiracy to kidnap a Muslim cleric. And where were they taking him back to? They were taking him back to Turkey. At the same time, earlier that year, we had Trump trying to negotiate a release for a pastor of our own that we ended up getting back. Right around the same time, we had all this situation going on with Jamal Khashoggi. All this stuff seems to be tying itself in. But Wall Street Journal coming out saying that there was this plan. General Flynn and Michael were going to kidnap this Muslim cleric, bring him back to Turkey in exchange for millions of dollars. And of course, then Robert Mueller went into investigating that. You guys probably remember this, right? So here we have this guy, of course, General Flynn was saying that this guy was incredibly dangerous. Now, we don't know if he was actually going to be making a ton of money off of this or whatever. This is where we start to get into the Rafikian bit and whether or not Flynn is person A or whatnot. But this was this whole situation, and we don't know exactly how it went down. But we still haven't really heard the open testimony from General Flynn. But let's remember, General Flynn said this guy was incredibly dangerous. His name was Fethullah Gulen, and he's an Islamic mullah. He was living in Pennsylvania. And what Flynn ended up outing was that there were some connections to this guy and the Clinton Foundation. As a matter of fact, he posted a video. I'm showing you a screenshot of it right now. And if you want to see it, you can see at the top there, it says Bill Clinton, Fethullah Gulen's contribution to the world. So here we have Bill Clinton on record in this short video. It's only a minute and a half talking about him. And Flynn was saying that this guy is super, super suspect. As a matter of fact, he even compared him to Muslim Brotherhood, said he was Turkey's Osama bin Laden. Now, this guy was living in Pennsylvania, like I said, but he was directly involved with lots of funding. As a matter of fact, he was even using American taxpayer funds to help fund some of his schools. He was running charter schools, more than 150 of them, all throughout the United States. And these schools were getting these H-1B visas, tons of them. So here we were almost having our own little immigration process through this mullah. And we know that he was funding the Clinton Foundation. That's part of what we found out. And this was through Cosmos Foundation, which is also a major donor to the Clinton Foundation. So Cosmos was getting money from this mullah, and they were turning around and giving it to the Clinton Foundation. So shouldn't be a surprise that Bill Clinton would support this guy. And it looks like through that process too, Huma Abedin was also getting money from this guy Gulen. And Erdogan was trying to get to this guy. And of course, he was being holed up here in Pennsylvania. But meanwhile, he was involved in all this visa status stuff for students going through these schools by way of this Cosmos Foundation. Well, there were a couple of other beneficiaries to this guy, Gulen. He was also supporting a couple people from Texas. One of them being Representative Sheila Miss Jackson, if you're nasty, Lee. And of course, the very same one who loves the open borders idea, hates Trump, and also is seen right there wearing that creepy little pedophile symbol ring. But the other one was Mr. Henry Cuellar. No. Well, keep this in mind. For many decades, our alphabet agencies have been supporting these different kinds of groups. And I don't want to oversimplify this because it is more complicated than this. These groups do have distinct different kinds of belief systems and whatnot. But overall, we've seen over the decades our alphabet agencies and our own government funding some of these groups, whether it be FAUN, whether it be Mujahideen back in the day. Remember, they had training camps out there in Brooklyn. We knew about this ever since the 70s. And I don't care if it's Al-Qaeda, Taliban, ISIS, MS-13, whatever flavor of the week you want to call it, even into Antifa. You're always going to have these leaders that might very well adapt to these political beliefs or spiritual beliefs or whatnot that might affect the region. But then oftentimes these guys are kind of pumped full of just funded mercenaries. And, Q has kind of implied this, that MS-13 is really no different than a group like ISIS. Obviously, they outwardly have these, different views or whatnot. But overall, they're worldwide terrorists, right? And they've always been kind of sponsored in different places. So here we've got all this fighting going on down at the Mexican border. And we know that some of that money was going to Democrats. And I'd be really curious to see how much the wall is affecting that in this point in time, because it seems to be creating a bit of panic. Now, Mexico's got their own issues. And like I said, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But I do find it very interesting that there's sort of a panic run and they were going after El Chapo and El Chapo's son. So there's a lot of power being taken down there. Yet that is still a really, really crazy situation because, like I said, the cartels are almost as powerful as the military at that point. But for the Sinaloa cartels who have been there for decades as well, for them to fight like this out in the open this way, as opposed to how they've been doing for the last even a decade or so, suggests that there's something that they're really going after, or something's been cut off, or there's some sort of panic. But there's got to be some sort of reason here for the escalated fighting. Is it just because they went after El Chapo's son? Could be. But I just showed you some connections in where some of that money is going to Democrats, particularly open border Democrats. And I mentioned that I would mention Beto O'Rourke again. Of course, this guy looks to be on the take too. Remember, he was offering some of his own, money to help some of these, he went down to the border and he staged this little thing, and it was essentially illegal, but he was helping people get across the border. Well, where was he getting that money from? Is this guy so well funded that he's just doing it out of the goodness of his heart? Well, I just showed you the picture there down in Mexico. It wouldn't surprise us all if a guy like that was also on the take. Maybe from this Gulen, maybe from El Chapo himself. Not really sure, but I would imagine Beto was on the take because I don't imagine he's got the kind of coin on his own to go down there on the border and pull a stunt like that, like he did earlier in the year, right? So we see these connections. We see the connections with Adam Schiff, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, and of course, all these people are in a panic right now. Now we see Nancy Pelosi go out there to Afghanistan, just as we're talking about Syria. She wants to, all of a sudden, she's really, really interested in stabilizing the region, right? And of course, when she was in Jordan, what was she talking about? She was talking about an influx of what she called refugees, but let's call them what they are. They were immigrants, right? Or illegals, or illegal migration, or whatever you want to call it. But it's the movement of people. It's the movement of drugs. It's the movement of money. This is very much how these people are getting, whether it's the Sinaloa cartels, or whether it's somebody like this Gulen, These are people that all tend to, tie back to the same kind of, whether it's the United Nations or things like this, or these legal foundations like KIND or something like this, where, legal defense foundations. There's a lot of money in moving people at the border because, of course, you move drugs. It's human trafficking. It's where everything kind of comes down. And it doesn't just affect our border of Mexico. It affects the borders out there. And that is exactly why I would imagine that Nancy Pelosi is all of a sudden so worried about stability in the region. After all, let's not forget that the Alessandros, just like the Clintons, are gangsters. Just like the Sinaloa cartel are gangsters. And what do gangsters do? Moving money, drugs, guns, whatever is going to be profitable at the time. That's what gangsters do. Now, let me finally leave you with this from military.com. Unlike any exercise, a massive Marine Corps war game is happening at 29 Palms. The Marine Corps hasn't done anything like it in decades. 10,000 Marines, sailors, and NATO troops have descended on Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center 29 Palms in California's Mojave Desert for a massive training exercise. The troops will be pitted against each other in a force-on-force battle as they prepare for a different kind of fight, one against an enemy with sophisticated equipment and skills. Most of the Marines participating are from the North Carolina-based 2nd Marine Division, which hasn't conducted a multi-regimental live maneuver exercise in decades. The Unscripted Marine Air Ground Task Force Warfighting Exercise, or MWX, will run for days. In a Wednesday release announcing it, Marine officials called it unlike any exercise held at the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center. An exercise of this scale, force-on-force, multi-regiment outfitted with significant information operations and unmanned aerial system assets, hasn't been conducted in the Marine Corps in my lifetime, Major General David Furness, 2nd Marine Division's commanding general, said in the release. It will test Marines to operate against a thinking enemy, he added. That's something that was on General David Berger's mind since before he became the Marines' top general. Let me skip you down here. MWX will be a true test of the division's ability to deploy and to operate at scale against a peer threat in a command and control denied and degraded environment, an environment where a thinking enemy is working hard to subvert all our efforts. Yeah, that sounds familiar. Technology will provide unique challenges across every level during this exercise, according to the release. That will include drones along with cyber and electronic warfare. And to see exactly how the Marines fare, they'll be wearing laser equipment that will alert them if they've been hit. At that point, they're considered a casualty, and the Marines unit is responsible for medical assistance and transport as soon as possible. So, could be something, could be everything, could be nothing at all. But I found it interesting. It's a big scale operation, like they said, one of the largest that they've ever seen. Not completely surprising, involving NATO troops. That happens all the time. But this kind of full-scale operation I thought was interesting, and I wanted to at least share with you. I particularly thought, considering all the things that we just talk about here, we have these interesting deaths, not just with Cummings, Nancy Pelosi's brother, and then, of course, her rush move down out there in the Middle East, and, of course, all that's going on down at the border. It seems oddly connected, and this would seem at the very least to serve at least as a very nice deterrent, saying, just to let you know, we're in the neighborhood. All right, kids, that's all I got for you for now. As always, if you like this video, please click like, share, and subscribe. Thanks to all of you who do that already. I greatly appreciate it. If you're new to my channel, welcome to you. Please understand that all those things I just asked for you to do will probably get undone at some point by Susan Wojcicki and her little YouTube ninjas. Just do me a favor and recheck yourself and re-click yourself, resubscribe yourself, do whatever you got to do. I would greatly appreciate it. I suggest bookmarking my page so it might make it easier to find my videos. I've got alternate links down below. I suggest that you might want to go ahead and subscribe to one of those in case something goes down on YouTube. You'll have another place to see my videos, my Gab, my BitChute, my Real.video, all that kind of stuff. It's all down below. My new Gab is IPOT 1776, as well as my Twitter, IPOT 1776. If you're on Twitter, please give me a join over there. I provide all kinds of snark when I'm not making videos. All right, that's all I got for you for now. If you want to send me some information, email is down below. P.O. Box is down below. If you want to support the channel, Patreon is down below. I'd appreciate it if you checked that out. This is Sir Patrick Mack, and until next time, stay funky.